On Christmas Eve, she nearly froze, until she pleaded with the rancher to let her stay as his wife. Each flake seemed heavier than the last, and the wind howled like a wild animal, cutting through any protection the world could offer. The roads were invisible under the thick layer of snow, and the trees swayed and groaned under the weight of frost. In the middle of this icy expanse, a young woman named Emily struggled forward, her body trembling from both exhaustion and the biting cold. Her coat, thick as it was, seemed almost useless against the wind that found every gap, every corner, every inch of exposed skin. Her boots were wet, and with each step the snow seemed to reach higher, pressing down on her feet like a heavy weight. Emily had been traveling for hours. Her goal was simple, at least in thought, just to reach her family's home for Christmas Eve. She had left in the late afternoon when the sky was still tinged with the soft orange of sunset. By the time night fell, snow had already begun to fall, and the soft dusting soon became a full-blown storm. She hadn't expected it to worsen so quickly. She had been confident that she would make it in time for dinner, a warm fire, and the laughter of familiar faces. But as the snow thickened and her carriage broke down in the middle of a deserted road, that confidence melted away, replaced by fear. She had tried to repair the carriage herself, but the cold made her fingers clumsy. Every bolt and latch seemed to resist her touch, stiffened by the frost. The horses were restless and uneasy in the rising storm, stamping their hooves and snorting clouds of warm breath into the freezing air. Emily's heart pounded not only from the cold, but from the creeping dread that perhaps she would not survive the night if she could not find proper shelter. The road ahead was obscured by the blizzard, and the dark shadows of trees loomed like specters on either side of her path. She considered turning back, but there was nowhere to go. She was trapped, isolated in a wilderness that seemed more hostile than anything she had ever imagined. Her mind raced. She thought of her family, of the Christmas tree they would be decorating without her, of the warm food she had left behind. And then she thought of the cold, how it gnawed at her, bit at her fingers, her toes, her nose, and her ears. She wrapped her arms around herself, hoping to preserve what little heat remained in her body, but it was a losing battle. The wind slipped through every fold of her clothing, every layer she had tried to use as protection. Her lips were blue, chapped, and numb, and every breath felt like a stab of icy needles in her lungs. She stumbled over the snow, her boots sinking into the thick drifts, leaving footprints that were quickly erased by the relentless fall of snowflakes. Hours seemed to stretch into eternity. Every sound was amplified, the cracking of branches under the weight of snow, the distant howl of the wind, the soft crunch of her own boots. Emily's hope was dwindling. She had been walking for what felt like hours, but in truth, she had made little progress. The darkness and the storm had swallowed any landmarks, any guideposts that might lead her to safety. Panic began to creep into her chest, a cold, heavy weight that pressed against her heart. She had never felt so small, so alone, so helpless. The realization that she might not make it through the night filled her with a terror unlike anything she had experienced before. Her thoughts began to scatter. She considered lying down in the snow to rest, but the thought of freezing in place made her shiver violently. She tried to focus, to think of a plan, but every plan seemed impossible. The roads were empty, the houses few and far between, and the snowstorm made it impossible to see even a few yards ahead. She had no choice but to keep moving, to fight against the cold with every ounce of strength she had left. Each step became more difficult, her legs growing heavy, her body sluggish from the cold and exhaustion. At one point she stumbled into a snowdrift that swallowed her knees, sending her crashing forward. She fell to her hands and knees, digging into the snow with numb fingers. She gasped for air, the cold stinging her lungs, her cheeks pressed against the icy surface. She could barely lift her head, and when she did, the world was a blur of white and gray. It seemed endless, like a frozen wasteland with no end, no warmth, no hope. Tears streamed down her face, freezing into delicate crystals as they touched her skin. She felt herself trembling uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from sheer fear. Then something in her mind shifted. She realized that she could not give up. Not now, not when there was even the tiniest chance of finding shelter, of finding someone who could help her survive. She forced herself to her feet, staggering, her body weak and shaking. Every movement was painful, every step a struggle. Yet she pushed forward, guided by instinct and desperation. She scanned the horizon, hoping, praying for a light, a shadow, anything that might indicate human presence. After what felt like hours of wandering, her eyes caught a faint glow in the distance. At first, she thought it was a trick of the storm, a mirage created by her tired mind. But as she squinted and moved closer, the glow became steadier, warmer. It was a light, a real light emanating from a building. Her heart leapt. She stumbled forward, nearly falling again, her hands clawing at the snow for support. She called out, her voice weak and trembling, "Hello, please, anyone." The sound of her own voice startled her, but she repeated it louder this time. The snow swallowed it at first, but then faintly she heard a response. A door opened somewhere in the glow, and a figure appeared, framed against the light. It was a man, tall, strong, cautious. He looked at her with surprise, concern, and suspicion. Emily's voice caught in her throat, but she managed to say, "Please, I don't have anywhere to stay. I'm freezing. Can you help me?" The man hesitated. Emily could see him studying her, weighing her desperation against his own caution. The snowstorm raged around them, yet in the glow of his cabin she felt a spark of hope. She fell to her knees, shivering violently, her words coming out in broken gasps. "Please, I can't survive out here alone. I'll do anything, just let me stay." Her plea was raw, desperate, unpolished, but it reached him. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped forward. Emily's heart leapt with a mix of relief and fear. She didn't know this man, didn't know if she could trust him, but she had no choice. The snow pressed in around her, the wind howled like a predator, and the cold gnawed at her bones. She had to survive, and this stranger was her only chance. The man opened the door wider, and Emily stumbled inside. The warmth hit her immediately, and she gasped, pressing her hands to her cheeks. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, pine, and something comforting she couldn't name. The walls were solid, the fire crackling in the hearth. She sank to the floor, shivering uncontrollably, feeling the life slowly return to her fingers and toes. He handed her a blanket, and she wrapped it tightly around herself, feeling the warmth seep into her frozen body. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to relax, if only slightly. The terror of the snowstorm, the fear of being alone in the cold, all of it began to ebb. She could still feel the chill in her bones, but she was safe, at least for the moment. She looked at the man, whose eyes were steady and cautious. He said little, but his presence was reassuring. Emily knew she had survived the worst night of her life, and though exhaustion weighed heavily on her, a flicker of hope had been ignited. As she sat by the fire, Emily realized that this Christmas Eve, which had started with so much fear and uncertainty, might yet end differently than she had imagined. She had nearly frozen to death, had faced the icy wilderness alone, and had come to the brink of despair. And yet here she was, alive, warm, and safe inside the walls of a stranger's cabin. She didn't yet know what the days ahead would bring, nor did she understand the connection that was beginning to form between her and this man who had offered her shelter. But for now, she simply breathed, thankful for survival, for warmth, and for the fragile hope that even in the harshest night, human kindness could shine through. Emily sat by the fire, the thick blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, feeling warmth slowly return to her. Frozen limbs. Every muscle in her body ached from the long struggle through the snow, and her teeth chattered uncontrollably. She glanced at the man who had let her inside, studying him cautiously. His expression was serious, guarded, yet there was a hint of concern in his eyes. He stood near the door, hands tucked into his coat, watching her as if weighing his next words carefully. I'm sorry to trouble you like this," Emily said softly, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to come into your home uninvited. I didn't know where else to go." Her words were halting, choked with the remnants of fear and exhaustion. She wanted to explain herself, to justify why she had come, but the words felt small compared to the storm she had faced outside. The man finally spoke, his voice deep but calm, cutting through the crackle of the fire. "You're far from trouble. But it's not often someone wanders through a snowstorm out here, especially on Christmas Eve." He paused, studying her more closely. "What were you doing out there alone?" Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry and raw. I was trying to get home to my family. I thought I could make it before the snow came, but I misjudged. My carriage broke down, and I didn't know what to do. I was afraid I wouldn't make it." Her voice broke, and she lowered her eyes to the floor. "I thought I might die out there." The man's expression softened, though he didn't show it openly. He stepped closer to the fire and knelt slightly, making himself appear less intimidating. "That was brave or foolish, maybe a little of both." He didn't smile, but there was warmth in his tone. You could have gotten yourself hurt, or worse. It's lucky I was here. Emily nodded, unable to speak at first. She could feel the tears gathering again, but she blinked them away. She didn't know why, but there was something comforting in this man's presence. He wasn't asking for anything in return. He hadn't judged her for being stranded, for being scared, for needing help. For the first time that night, she felt a spark of relief that went beyond warmth. "I thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the fire's crackle. "I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found you." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he moved around the cabin, checking the firewood stacked neatly near the hearth. He tossed a few logs onto the flames, making them roar louder and push more heat into the room. Then he turned, his eyes meeting hers. "Sit tight. You need to warm up and rest. You've been walking through the snow for hours. You need food and water, too." Emily nodded again, grateful for the small acts of kindness. She sank lower into the blanket, her hands pressed against the warmth. The fire seemed to seep into her frozen bones, and for a moment she allowed herself to relax. The storm outside still raged, but inside the cabin the world felt safe, almost magical. The soft glow of the fire reflected off the wooden walls, and the aroma of burning pine mixed with something faintly earthy and comforting. Minutes passed in silence. The man moved quietly around the cabin, preparing a small meal. Emily watched him work. There was an ease in his movements, a familiarity with the tasks at hand that spoke of years spent living alone, managing his home and his land. He chopped some vegetables, heated water for tea, and set a small pot on the stove. He moved carefully, deliberately, as if every action mattered, yet there was no hurry, no anxiety. Emily realized she had not even asked his name. She felt awkward about it, but she needed something to say, a way to connect. I don't even know your name," she said softly. He looked up at her, eyes steady. John Harper," he replied. "And you are?" "Emily," she said. "Emily Collins." Her voice was faint, but she tried to smile. "Thank you again, Mr. Harper. Call me John," he interrupted gently. "There's no need for formalities tonight. You're a guest in my home, and you've been through enough for one evening." Emily nodded, grateful. She noticed a small, flickering hope rising inside her. Perhaps this night, which had begun with terror and fear, could have a different ending. She could survive. She could rest. She could breathe. After a short while, John placed a steaming cup of tea in her hands. The warmth of the cup against her frozen fingers made her shiver, but the heat spread quickly, bringing life back to her numb hands. She sipped slowly, savoring the warmth and the comfort it brought. John watched her quietly, his expression thoughtful. "You'll need more than tea to recover," he said finally. "You should eat something." Emily looked at the small meal he had prepared, a simple arrangement of bread, cheese, and a few preserved vegetables. It was modest, but to her it felt like a feast. She smiled faintly. "Thank you, it smells wonderful." "You need strength," John said. "The storm outside isn't letting up anytime soon, and you'll need every bit of it to get through the night." As she ate, Emily began to feel the tension in her body slowly melt. She realized how lucky she was, how close she had come to disaster. Every bite of food, every sip of tea, reminded her that survival was possible. She looked around the cabin, noticing the small details, the neat shelves lined with jars of preserves, the sturdy furniture, the simple but warm decorations near the hearth. It was a home built with care, a home that reflected its owner's hard work and attention to detail. John moved around quietly, preparing his own simple meal. He didn't speak much, but Emily felt comfortable with his presence. There was something reassuring about him, a steadiness that balanced her frantic energy. For the first time in hours, she felt safe. After a while, she gathered the courage to speak again. "John, I know it's strange me showing up like this, but I don't even know how to repay you for your kindness. I can't stay here forever, and I feel like I owe you so much already." John paused, setting down his fork. He looked at her with a calm, unwavering gaze. "You don't owe me anything," he said simply. "I helped because it was the right thing to do. That's enough. Sometimes that's all there is to it." Emily nodded, though she felt a warmth in her chest beyond the fire's heat. She had been so focused on surviving the cold, the storm, the fear, that she hadn't thought about kindness. She realized now that the world wasn't entirely harsh, that people could still care for strangers in moments of need. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the cabin the world felt quiet and safe. Emily and John sat near the fire in companionable silence. She could hear the wind whipping against the walls, the snow piling higher and higher outside, but she felt secure. She realized that this night, which had begun with terror, was slowly becoming a story of survival, warmth, and unexpected humanity. After some time, Emily spoke again, her voice quieter now. I don't even know how to describe how grateful I am. You saved me tonight." John gave a small nod. "You survived because you were brave enough to keep going, even when it seemed impossible. I just gave you a place to rest. That's all anyone can do." Emily smiled faintly, feeling a connection growing between them. She didn't fully understand it yet, but there was a spark of something comforting, something safe in his presence. Perhaps it was the kindness, perhaps it was the quiet strength he radiated. Whatever it was, it made the storm outside feel a little less terrifying. As the night wore on, Emily's energy slowly returned. She helped John clear the small dishes from their simple meal, her movements still shaky but growing steadier. He watched her quietly, not saying much, but there was a softness in his eyes she couldn't ignore. She realized that he had allowed her into his home, into his life, in a way that few people would. She felt a deep sense of gratitude and perhaps something more, a strange, unexpected comfort in having someone else near. Hours passed and the fire crackled on. Emily finally allowed herself to rest properly, curling up in the blanket near the warmth. John gave her a nod, his expression unreadable but his actions gentle. He did not hover or intrude, but he remained close enough that she felt secure. That night, Emily understood something important. Even in the harshest of winters, even in the most desperate situations, human kindness could shine through. And so, as the snowstorm continued outside, Emily slept for the first time in hours, feeling the warmth seep into her bones. She didn't know what the next day would bring or how her life might change from this night, but she knew one thing: she had survived the worst, and she was not alone. The storm outside raged on, snow piling higher with each passing hour. But inside John's cabin, the warmth of the fire created a small pocket of safety, almost like a world untouched by the cold and wind. Emily sat close to it, still wrapped in the thick blanket John had given her. Her fingers were slowly regaining their strength, her toes no longer numb, and the fear that had gripped her earlier was giving way to a fragile sense of calm. The night was long, and exhaustion threatened to pull her into sleep, but there was an unspoken tension in the air, a need to talk, to share the weight of the day. John, meanwhile, moved around the cabin with a quiet efficiency. He checked the firewood stacked near the hearth, refilled the kettle, and glanced occasionally at Emily, ensuring she was comfortable. He did not speak much, but his presence was steady and grounding. There was a calm authority about him, a sense of reliability that made the cabin feel even safer. Emily observed him from where she sat, studying the lines of his face, the way his hands moved, the careful attention he gave to each task. She felt a growing curiosity about him, how long he had lived in this remote place, what his life had been like, and why he seemed so different from anyone she had ever met. After a while, she gathered the courage to speak. "John," she said softly, her voice hesitant, "how long have you lived here alone?" He paused, setting the kettle back on the stove and leaning against the counter. "Long enough," he said simply, his eyes not meeting hers immediately. "This land has been in my family for generations. I've been here most of my adult life. I like the solitude most of the time." Emily nodded, sensing that this was a subject he did not discuss lightly. "It must be hard sometimes," she said gently. "Being so far from everyone else, especially on nights like this." John finally looked at her, and she noticed a flicker of emotion in his eyes, something soft, almost vulnerable. "It can be," he admitted, "but there's peace in it too. I know the land, I know the animals, I know what to do when the snow comes or the storms hit. It's predictable in a way that people aren't." He paused, then added with a faint hint of humor, "And I prefer it that way." Emily smiled faintly, feeling a connection to this man who had opened his home to her without hesitation. "I can understand that," she said, "but sometimes maybe it's nice to have someone to share it with. Someone to talk to or even just be near." Her words were soft, almost a whisper, and she looked down at her hands, embarrassed by the vulnerability in her voice. John didn't answer immediately. Instead, he poured 2 small cups of tea from the kettle and handed one to Emily. The steam rose in soft curls, carrying the comforting aroma into the cabin. Emily accepted it gratefully, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers and hands. She sipped slowly, savoring the sensation, and then looked up at him. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to," she said softly, "but do you ever get lonely?" John's eyes met hers, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself a small, genuine smile. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I've learned to live with it. It's not easy, especially on nights like this, but I don't regret it. Solitude has its own rewards." Emily nodded thoughtfully. She understood that feeling, the quiet longing for companionship even while appreciating independence. She felt a strange sense of kinship with him, as if their experiences, though different, had some common thread. The cabin, the fire, the storm outside, all of it seemed to bind them together in a moment that felt larger than the two of them, a shared experience of survival, vulnerability, and trust. As the night continued, Emily slowly began to regain her strength. She helped John move some of the firewood closer to the hearth, her movements careful but determined. He watched her with a mix of admiration and curiosity, noting her resilience. Despite the exhaustion, despite the fear she had faced earlier, she was determined to be useful, to contribute in whatever small way she could. "You're stronger than you realize," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Most people wouldn't have made it through what you did." Emily blushed, feeling a mix of pride and embarrassment. I didn't have a choice," she said. "I had to keep going, I couldn't give up, not out there in the snow." Her voice faltered slightly as she recalled the frozen night, the fear that had threatened to overwhelm her. "It was terrifying. I've never been so cold, so scared in my life." John nodded, his expression serious. "I know. I've seen the winter here take more than it should. People underestimate it. The snow isn't just cold, it's relentless, and it doesn't forgive mistakes." Emily shivered at the memory, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I understand that now," she whispered. "I thought I was careful, but I wasn't ready for it. I was so foolish to think I could make it alone." "You weren't foolish," John said firmly. "You were brave and you survived. That's what matters." Emily looked at him, surprised by the kindness and certainty in his tone. "Thank you," she said softly. I can't tell you how much it means to hear that." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the wind howl outside and the fire crackle inside. Emily felt a growing sense of trust in John, a belief that she was safe in his presence. There was something comforting about his quiet strength, his steady demeanor, and the way he seemed to understand the harshness of the world without being hardened by it. Eventually, Emily spoke again, this time with a touch of humor, though her voice was still soft. "I suppose I should have known better than to wander into a storm like this. Most people would have warned me not to come out here." John chuckled quietly, a low, warm sound that made Emily feel a little more at ease. "Most people stay inside. Most people don't understand the land like I do. You were lucky, and maybe persistent." Emily smiled, feeling a spark of something she hadn't expected, connection, perhaps even a hint of admiration for this man who had saved her. She realized that despite the fear, the cold, and the exhaustion, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that the night would end safely, hope that she could survive this ordeal, and hope that perhaps she had found someone she could trust in this lonely, snowbound world. As the hours passed, John began to share small stories of life on the ranch. He spoke of the animals, the changing seasons, the work required to maintain the land through winter, and the quiet joys of solitude. Emily listened intently, fascinated by the rhythm of his life, the simplicity and depth of it. She asked questions, curious about the routines, the challenges, and the rewards. John answered patiently, sometimes with humor, sometimes with quiet reflection. Their conversation was gentle and natural, a rhythm that made the cabin feel warmer than the fire alone ever could. At one point, Emily realized that the storm had not eased, that the snow continued to fall relentlessly. Yet, inside, she felt a sense of security and belonging she had not expected to find. The warmth of the cabin, the glow of the fire, and John's quiet presence combined to create a sense of home she had never experienced. She realized that survival was not only about enduring the cold, but also about finding connection, trust, and kindness in the midst of fear. Hours later, as the wind continued to batter the cabin walls, Emily found herself talking about her life, her family, her dreams, and the little things that made her happy. John listened, asking questions, sharing thoughts when appropriate, and creating a space where Emily could feel safe expressing herself. She felt a bond growing, subtle but undeniable, between them. It was not romance, not yet, but it was trust, understanding, and shared humanity. As the night wore on, Emily's exhaustion finally overcame her fear. She curled up near the fire, wrapped in blankets, feeling the warmth seep into her bones. John continued his work quietly, tending to the fire, ensuring that the cabin remained safe and comfortable. He did not intrude, but his presence was a steady, reassuring force. Emily realized she had never felt so cared for, so protected in her life. Before she drifted into a restless sleep, Emily looked at John, her heart filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered softly, though he could hear her, "for everything tonight, for saving me, for letting me in, for being here." John glanced at her, his expression calm but not unfeeling. "You don't need to thank me," he said quietly. "You survived because you had the courage to keep going. I just gave you a place to rest. That's all." Emily smiled faintly, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the fire. She knew the night was far from over, and that the storm outside would continue to test them both. Yet inside the cabin, she felt a sense of safety, trust, and hope she hadn't expected to find. The snowstorm was relentless, but she was no longer alone. And so, as the wind howled outside and the fire crackled inside, Emily and John shared the quiet intimacy of survival, a companionship born not of words alone, but of presence, trust, and the understanding that sometimes the harshest nights could give rise to the strongest. Connections, the snowstorm finally began to ease the following morning, though the landscape outside remained buried in thick layers of snow. Emily woke to the soft glow of morning light filtering through the cabin windows and the faint aroma of breakfast cooking. For the first time since the night she had wandered through the storm, she felt a sense of hope mixed with cautious curiosity about what the day would bring. Her body was still stiff from the cold and the long hours of exposure, but the warmth of the cabin and the comforting presence of John made her feel almost human again. John was already up, moving quietly around the cabin. He had prepared a simple breakfast of warm porridge and fresh bread, the aroma filling the room with a sense of home and comfort. Emily sat by the table, wrapped in a thick blanket, watching him with a mixture of gratitude and fascination. There was something grounding about the way he moved, methodical, steady, familiar with the land and the routines of life on the ranch. Even after the long, exhausting night, he seemed calm, composed, and unhurried. "You should eat," John said, breaking the comfortable silence. His voice was calm, almost soothing. "You need strength after what you've been through." Emily nodded and took a small spoonful of porridge. The warmth spread through her body, easing the aches in her muscles and the stiffness in her joints. "Thank you," she said softly. I don't know what I would have done without you." John glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You did what you had to do to survive. I just made sure you had a safe place to do it." Emily ate slowly, savoring each bite, and as she did, she felt a growing determination to repay his kindness in some way. She knew she could not simply sit and do nothing while he continued to care for her. She needed to contribute to help, to prove that she was more than just a guest relying on his generosity. "John," she said after a moment, I want to help. I know I'm a stranger here, but I can do chores, help with the animals, or anything you need. I want to earn my keep, even if just a little." John regarded her thoughtfully. There was a pause, a moment of hesitation, as if he were weighing her words. Then he nodded. "Very well," he said. "There's always work to be done around here. You can start with feeding the animals and helping with the smaller chores inside. It won't be easy, but it's manageable. Are you sure you want to do this?" Emily nodded eagerly. "Yes, I want to. I need to do something useful." And so, after breakfast, she wrapped herself in warm layers and stepped outside with John into the bright, snowy morning. The storm had left the world transformed. Trees bowed under the weight of snow. The ground was soft and unsteady, and every step left deep imprints. Emily shivered slightly, not from cold but from anticipation. She had never spent time on a ranch, and she was curious about the life John led, about the routines and responsibilities he carried alone. John guided her first to the animals. There were a few horses, some chickens, and a small herd of goats. Emily listened carefully as John explained their needs: the horses' feeding schedule, the chickens' shelter, the goats' water and hay. She followed his instructions, moving with care, and was surprised by how quickly she adapted. The animals seemed to sense her presence, responding to her calm movements and gentle voice. "You're doing well," John said quietly as she finished feeding the chickens. "Most people would fumble or be afraid at first, but you have a steady hand." Emily smiled faintly, feeling a sense of pride. "I guess I just want to be useful. I don't want to feel like a burden." "You're not a burden," John said firmly. "You've already brought more warmth and life into this cabin than you realize, but it's good to see you finding your own strength." The morning passed in a rhythm of work and quiet conversation. Emily discovered that she enjoyed the tasks more than she had anticipated. The physical labor, the responsibility, and the satisfaction of seeing immediate results. Feeding the animals, cleaning the stalls, and organizing supplies gave her a sense of purpose she had never experienced in her city life. And through it all, John watched patiently, offering guidance when necessary but allowing her to take initiative. By midday, they returned to the cabin for a brief rest. Emily felt tired, but it was a satisfying exhaustion, different from the fear-induced fatigue of the previous night. She sat by the fire, sipping warm tea, and watched John move about with quiet efficiency. There was a comfort in the way he lived, his attention to detail, his quiet resilience, his respect for the land and the life he had built. Emily felt a growing admiration for him, not just for saving her, but for the way he carried himself through life with honesty, strength, and humility. Over the next few days, Emily settled into a routine. She helped with chores inside and outside the cabin, learning quickly how to care for the animals, maintain the fire, and manage the day-to-day tasks of ranch life. John guided her gently, correcting mistakes without harshness and praising her successes. Their interactions became more natural, comfortable, and even playful at times. Emily found herself laughing quietly at his dry humor, and he seemed to enjoy her lightheartedness, though he rarely showed it openly. One afternoon, as they worked together to clear snow from the paths around the cabin, Emily paused to catch her breath. The sun was low, casting a soft golden glow over the snow-covered landscape. She looked at John, who was moving steadily, lifting heavy shovels of snow without complaint. She realized she had come to admire his strength, not just physical, but the strength of character that allowed him to live so independently in such a harsh environment. "You make this look so easy," she said, her voice light with admiration. "I can't imagine doing this every day, especially in winter." John glanced at her, a small smile breaking through his usual stoicism. "It becomes easier with time," he said. "You learn to work with the land, respect it, and accept its challenges. It's hard, yes, but there's also reward. The reward is in the work itself and in knowing you can handle whatever comes." Emily nodded thoughtfully, feeling a sense of understanding. She realized that she had been sheltered in her life, untested in ways that truly mattered. Here, in this remote cabin, she was learning not just about survival, but about resilience, determination, and the quiet satisfaction that comes from hard work and self-reliance. As the days passed, the bond between Emily and John deepened. They shared meals together, discussed life, and slowly began to trust each other in ways that went beyond mere companionship. Emily learned about John's past, the struggles he had faced, and the reasons he had chosen this solitary life. She listened with empathy, never judging, only appreciating the man who had given her refuge when she had needed it most. John, in turn, learned about Emily's life before the storm, the family she missed, the city she had left behind, the dreams she held close to her heart. He admired her courage, her determination, and her willingness to face adversity without giving in to fear. There was a mutual respect growing between them, quiet but undeniable, built on shared experiences, survival, and the simple acts of kindness that had brought them together. One evening, after a long day of work, Emily and John sat by the fire, exhausted but content. Emily reflected on the days that had passed, the storm, the night of fear, the work, the conversations, and the small moments of connection. She realized that something had shifted within her. The fear and desperation that had defined her arrival were slowly being replaced by gratitude, admiration, and a sense of belonging. She felt safe, not just in the cabin, but with John. "John," she said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, I don't know how to explain it, but these past few days have been different. I've never experienced anything like this before. I feel at home somehow." John looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment, then softened. "Home isn't always a place," he said quietly. "Sometimes it's a feeling, a person, a sense of safety and trust. I think you found that here." Emily smiled faintly, feeling warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. She realized that the cabin, the work, and the companionship had given her something she had not known she needed: connection. And she sensed that John, in his quiet way, had found it too, someone to share the solitude, someone to trust, someone to care for. That night, as they settled in by the fire, Emily felt a deep sense of peace. The storm had passed, the snow remained, but the worst was over. She had survived, recovered, and discovered a strength within herself she had not known existed. And in John's presence, she felt a bond growing that went beyond survival, a companionship built on respect, trust, and shared humanity. Emily knew the days ahead would not be easy. The winter was harsh, and the responsibilities of the ranch were many. But for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face the challenges, not just because she had survived the storm, but because she was no longer alone. She had found someone who understood the hardships of life, who valued honesty and resilience, and who had offered her refuge when she had needed it most. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Emily realized that her journey through the storm had led her to something unexpected, a place to belong, a purpose, and a connection that she had never imagined. And as the fire crackled softly beside them, she felt a quiet hope that the days to come would bring even more: friendship, trust, and perhaps something more. The winter had softened slightly, though the land was still blanketed in snow, sparkling under the pale sunlight of a late morning. Emily stood at the edge of the small garden John had cleared earlier in the week, brushing snow from her coat and taking a deep breath of the crisp air. The days at the ranch had passed in a blur of work, learning, and shared quiet moments. Each morning she rose with a sense of purpose, and each evening she went to bed feeling a connection she had never known before. Yet, beneath the calm, Emily felt a growing unease, a realization that her life could no longer continue as it had before. For the first time in her life, Emily considered what it would mean to leave. The thought of returning to her family, to the city, and to the life she had known felt distant and hollow compared to the warmth and companionship she had discovered in the cabin. She had survived the storm, she had learned resilience, and she had found trust in John, a trust that went beyond gratitude. And now she realized that she did not want to leave this place, this life, or him. She entered the cabin, brushing snow from her boots, and found John tending to the fire. He glanced up, offering a small smile, the kind that seemed to make the room warmer than the flames themselves. "Morning," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Sleep well." Emily nodded, her heart pounding slightly. "Yes," she said softly. I've been thinking, John, about everything." John raised an eyebrow, curious. "About what?" Emily hesitated, searching for the right words. She felt nervous, almost vulnerable, but the thought of not speaking her truth was heavier than her fear. "About leaving," she said finally. I don't want to go back, not yet. I want to stay here, with you." John paused, setting down the fire poker. He studied her carefully, his eyes searching hers as if trying to understand the weight of her words. Emily's hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the intensity of the moment. She swallowed, her voice trembling yet determined. I know it's sudden and I know it's strange, but these past days you've shown me kindness, trust, and a life I never knew I could have. I want to be part of it. I want to stay here, with you, if you'll let me." The cabin felt suddenly quiet, the crackle of the fire louder in the tense pause that followed. John's expression was unreadable at first, a mixture of surprise, contemplation, and something deeper he did not reveal. Emily held her breath, waiting, fearing that her plea might be too bold, too forward, or even foolish. Yet she had spoken from her heart, and the words, though simple, carried all the honesty and emotion she felt. Finally, John spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Emily, you don't have to plead," he said. "I've noticed these past days, your courage, your determination, your willingness to help. It's more than I expected from anyone, especially someone who arrived here in the storm, frightened and exhausted." Emily's heart fluttered. She could feel hope stirring, but she forced herself to remain composed. I just couldn't leave, not after all you've done for me. And not after I realized I care about this place and about you." Her voice faltered and she looked down, ashamed of the vulnerability she had allowed herself to show. John moved closer, his gaze steady and unwavering. He seemed to weigh his words carefully, as if speaking them too quickly might shatter the fragile tension that had built between them. "Emily," he said finally, "you don't need to ask permission to stay. If you want to be here, then be here. You've earned a place not because you pleaded, but because you belong. And you've brought life and warmth into this cabin that I didn't realize I needed." Tears welled in Emily's eyes, though she smiled through them. Relief, joy, and a sense of belonging surged through her all at once. She felt her fears melt away, replaced by the deep, comforting knowledge that she had found not only safety but a home. "Thank you," she whispered. I promise I'll do my best. I'll help, I'll learn, and I'll make this place as warm as you've made it for me." John smiled faintly, a rare expression that softened the lines of his face. "I know you will," he said quietly, "and I'll make you a promise too. This cabin, this land, and my life, none of it will feel complete without you. You're not just a guest, Emily. You're part of it now, part of my life." Emily's heart swelled. She had never felt such acceptance, such trust, such intimacy. It was more than companionship. It was understanding, care, and the unspoken promise of partnership. She realized then that the bond they had built over the past days, the survival through the storm, the work on the ranch, the quiet conversations by the fire, had grown into something deeper than either of them could have anticipated. The day passed with a quiet sense of celebration, though there were no grand gestures or loud proclamations. Emily helped John with the chores outside, clearing paths through the snow and tending to the animals. Each task they completed together reinforced their connection, a shared rhythm that spoke more than words ever could. Emily felt a sense of belonging she had never known, an understanding that she was not only contributing but also being valued, trusted, and appreciated. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink, Emily and John sat by the fire. The cabin was warm, cozy, and alive with the quiet hum of home. Emily felt a courage growing inside her, a certainty that she had made the right choice. She looked at John, who was quietly tending the fire, his presence steady and reassuring. "John," she said softly, I want to stay not just for the winter, but longer, if you'll have me. I want to be here with you, for as long as you'll let me." John turned to her, his eyes reflecting the firelight and something deeper, something tender, protective, and honest. He studied her for a long moment, then reached out and gently took her hand. "Emily," he said quietly, "I can't imagine this place without you now. You've brought warmth, life, and hope that I didn't even realize I was missing. If you want to stay, then stay. Not because you asked, but because you belong here with me. As part of my life, my home, and perhaps something more." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of joy. She nodded, squeezing his hand. "I belong here," she whispered, "with you." The fire crackled, the snow continued to glisten outside, and in that quiet moment, Emily realized that the storm, the fear, and the desperate night she had endured were not the end. They were the beginning. That icy Christmas Eve had brought her to the edge of despair, but it had also led her to warmth, to home, and to a connection she would never forget. The following days were filled with a renewed sense of purpose and companionship. Emily worked alongside John, tending to the animals, repairing the cabin, and learning the ways of the ranch. Each task, each moment, strengthened their bond. They laughed together over small mistakes, shared stories of their pasts, and grew comfortable in each other's presence. Emily realized that she had not only found safety, but a partnership built on respect, trust, and shared experience. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day, Emily reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The snowstorm, the fear, the night of desperation. It all seemed distant now, softened by the warmth of the cabin and the presence of John. She realized that sometimes life's harshest moments could lead to the most unexpected and beautiful outcomes. John looked at her, noticing the thoughtful expression on her face. "You've changed since that first night," he said quietly. "You've grown stronger, braver, and somehow more at home here than I expected." Emily smiled, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the fire. "I've learned a lot," she said softly, "about survival, about hard work, and about trust. But mostly I've learned that sometimes the people who come into your life when you least expect them can change everything." John reached out, taking her hand once more. "I agree," he said quietly, "and I'm grateful for that night, the storm, and for you. You've made this place feel complete, Emily, more complete than I ever thought possible." As Christmas approached, Emily and John celebrated quietly, not with grand parties but with simple joys. A small tree decorated with handmade ornaments, a warm meal, and the comfort of each other's company. Emily felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life she had found, for the love that had grown quietly, naturally, and profoundly between them. And in that quiet, snow-filled cabin, Emily realized something important. Survival was not only about facing the cold, the fear, or the storm. Survival was about connection, trust, and the courage to open one's heart. The night she had nearly frozen, the desperate plea she had made, had brought her to a home she had never imagined. A home filled with warmth, love, and the promise of a shared future. In John's steady presence, Emily felt safe, valued, and loved. And in her own courage and determination, John found someone who completed the quiet rhythm of his life. A partner, a companion, and perhaps the love he had long kept at a distance. Together, they faced the winter, not as strangers, but as two souls bound by trust, respect, and the extraordinary journey that had begun on a stormy Christmas Eve.